Hello, welcome to the Officio Spotlight podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb and thank you very much for listening. Today, I'm really excited to say we're going to be talking about the topics of imposter syndrome, self-limiting beliefs, I guess being the best person you can. And I'm really pleased to say that joining me for this discussion is Reshma Ramachandran. Reshma is the Group Senior Vice President and Chief Transformation Officer at Adecco Group, as well as a member of the Supervisory Board at Oxford Instruments, board member at the World Women Foundation, and a successful TEDx speaker. So Reshma, firstly, thank you so much for joining me. Secondly, clearly you are a very successful businesswoman with a long list of considerable achievements. So have you always been this confident and successful person that we see before us today?
Simon, thanks very much for having me and allowing me to speak on some of my favorite topics. One, I think it's completely how we define success. If it's all my professional or educational achievements, I have to say it's nothing that I've dreamt of. I never thought I would reach where I've reached. And this is probably comes to the topics of imposter syndrome, self-limiting beliefs, and what happens when you have self-limitings, how high or how low you set your ambitions. Simple answer to your question is no, I've always not been like this. And if you had asked me 20 years back, is this where I would have thought I would reach? Clearly not. I was definitely encouraged to study. I was definitely encouraged to get good grades, pursue what I wanted to pursue. However, I think there was a general expectation of what the role of women in the society was.
Right.
In a very subconscious way, it kind of conditions you to think no matter how well you study, no matter how good grades you get, there is a social element of what today in corporate world, at least we call as a glass ceiling. There is a social element of the ceiling that is already set for you.
Yeah.
So you don't think beyond that. So for me, I grew up like that. Yes, I had dreams and yes, I had ambitions, but in a way, it was all limited by the social condition.
Of course, yeah, makes absolute sense. And imposter syndrome, I think, is a term we'll have all heard. But for you, what does that mean?
Honestly, the imposter syndrome means one, probably it's got to do with the perfectionism all of us have. So again, I call it the social conditioning. We have a definition of what is perfect. So I'll take my roles, the different roles that I have. I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a daughter-in-law, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a cousin. And then, of course, I'm someone in a professional world. So just speaking about 6 or 7 roles I have to play, what's the perfect image of these different roles? And do you live up to that perfect image that you've created? And probably you've created it because a society has a certain perfect image of these roles. And you never live up to that. In your mind, you never live up to that. This is for me the imposter syndrome. So if I take the professional world, I have a certain title, I'm at a certain hierarchy in the organization. And especially when it comes to leadership, when you're leading teams, there is a perfect image that we create, this macho leadership. Everything has to be positive. You're always giving energy. You can't talk about problems. The more perfect an image is of a role that I play or I need to play, the more imposter syndrome I have. Then I think I'm not good enough.
Yeah, understood. How have you kind of tackled those self-limiting beliefs, which I guess is another way of framing it, right? You're kind of your internal monologue telling you you're not good enough. You've obviously overcome that. How have you done that?
Overcome might be taking it too far.
Okay.
I think it's more a workaround, right? I do think all of us have some self-limiting beliefs. And, if I'm not so sure, and you're prompting me to think further. So we should definitely do the second podcast where, I can reflect on some of these thoughts. Are self-limiting beliefs and imposter syndrome linked? I have not thought about it, so I can't answer that. But in terms of self-limiting beliefs, I think it's more finding a workaround. It's got to also do with, courage versus confidence. Courage is actually doing something when you don't know what the outcome is, you just go ahead, do it. Confidence is something that comes with repeated doing. You know the process, you know what result you will get. So if I take running, for instance, I'm not a runner. So I need to have the courage to run because I don't know what's going to happen to my body. If you are a professional runner, for instance, you have the confidence because you have done it so many times, you know what's going to come. Yeah. So self-limiting beliefs is for me something very similar. Yeah. And how do you understand it's a self-limiting belief? So for that, you just need to open up your mind. And, I bring in another term here, the growth mindset. So if you really have the growth mindset, you're thinking, you're curious, you're learning. And what I mentioned at the beginning, exposure, you don't know what you don't know. So you try to know what you don't know. You actually expand your horizon. And when you expand your horizon, you clearly see, yes, what is stopping you from going after that expanded horizon is something that is inside you, something that is intrinsic, because you don't know what will happen when you take that step. So you will, in my view, and this is why I said overcame is probably a wrong use, at least for me. I have not overcome anything. I'm still scared. I still feel like, I'm not good enough. But do I still go ahead and do it? I still go ahead and do it. I think what has changed, the narrative that has changed in my head from the time I grew up, where, again, growing up in India, the challenge was, it's a very competitive world. So you probably have one opportunity at anything, one take at anything. So you want to get that right. If you don't get that right, you never know whether you will get that second opportunity. So getting it right the first time, the winning first time was so important. That's a narrative that has changed in my head to say that I don't need to get it right the first time. Maybe it's a second take, maybe it's a third take, maybe it's the 25th take, but it's okay. I don't need to be scared about it. Yes, I feel I'm not good enough, but I don't need to feel scared about I'm not good enough.
Nothing's exclusively male or female, but it's predominantly a female issue, or interested in your perspective.
So it's a very interesting question. And I have to say, every time I have thought about self-limiting beliefs or self-rejections or imposter syndrome, I have always associated it with women.
Okay.
And many of the keynotes that I've given or the speeches that I give, there are a lot of men who have walked up to me after and said, oh, it resonated with me so much. And that actually got me thinking that, what men also have self-limiting beliefs, self-rejections, and the imposter syndrome. What I feel is the magnitude is different. The scale is different. So where men would self-reject or have self-limiting beliefs to where women have, that is different. And I'll give you an example about job applications. In any job applications, a woman wants to meet 100% of the requirements in the job description. If you don't meet the 100%, you self-reject and you don't apply to these jobs. Men, 80% you meet, you apply. Yeah. So now another way of looking at the 80% is if you're meeting only 60%, you would actually not apply. That's a self-limiting belief or self-rejection men are doing as well. The reality is, in any job description, what the employer looks for is 20%. So both ways, you have self-limited and self-rejected, but the magnitude is very different.
Yeah. Reshma, you obviously in your roles at the moment, board member, very senior individual. Are businesses losing out on talent, businesses losing out on opportunities because they're not tackling these issues?
You've touched on a very, very important topic. We are living in a talent scarce world. So talent scarcity for two reasons. One, skills. The shelf life of skills are dramatically coming down. So, pre-pandemic, I remember people saying the shelf life of skills is like 5 years. Today, if you would read any article, it would say, shelf life is like 2 to 3 years. So the shelf life is dramatically coming down. This is one part of talent scarcity. The other part of talent scarcity is the demographics are changing. So if you think of our parents, they started with the same job, retired with the same job. Our generation, we have changed jobs. Now, if you look at the next generation, they don't even want to stay in a job Monday to Friday. They want to have the variety in the job. They want flexibility. They want to work from anywhere. So both factors together, the shelf life of skills coming down and the demographics changing, there is a talent scarcity. Now, how do you attract talent is the big question that every CEO has on the mind, every leader has on the mind. This is also where I think fundamentally leadership can play a role. And fundamentally, the definition of leadership should change. Historically, we have looked at leadership as very macho. You don't talk about problems, you can't be vulnerable. You need to have answers to everything. You need to have solutions for every problem. This is a significant shift I'm seeing. And personally, for me, how I identify myself as a leader is as well that I'm not perfect. I don't have answers to everything. I don't have solutions to everything. But collectively as a team, how do I give that safe space, the psychological safety that people can actually speak their mind, the freedom of opinion? How can you be more inclusive? We all come from diverse backgrounds. Even when we look the same, our journey has not been the same. So how do we bring that whole diversity to the table and make sure that people can contribute? So my team, if you see, we have 14 nationalities. And I say nationalities because you don't even look the same.
Yeah.
And definitely your journey is it. So an important and a critical piece of leadership is definitely changing that paradigm of, I know it all to I will learn it all.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things you do a lot, Reshma, is mentoring women. Is that broadly on these issues around in the workplace and confidence? Again, that would be really interesting to understand a little bit more about in terms of how you mentor people to success, because it's clearly something you do.
I think all of these elements and topics are very connected, right? And why women? And I think I do mentor, I do coach, let me put it this way, very simply put, and a lot of people have a very loose definition around mentoring and coaching, right? So I would put it this very simply. I spend time with women.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter. So it's a power of conversations. I do have conversations with women. So there's not a single woman, especially LinkedIn, who has reached out to me to whom I have refused time. I do spend time with women to have that conversation. And why women? And I think for me, there are two parts to that. One is, my own journey. I've had a lot of self-limiting beliefs, which is very internal. And, someone could just look at me and say, that is your internal problem, you need to overcome. Yes, that's one. Externally, women don't get that many opportunities. So combine the self-limiting beliefs to an externally, where your growth or the height to which you can reach is capped. Both put together, women are always at the receiving end. So this is the reason why I spend time with women. Now, what I spend time on is externally, it's a collective issue. Organizations have to come together. Society has to come together. And I tell this, I am successful because I have a great husband. So it starts at home. So society has to come together. Organizations have to come together. And then, the external factors slowly change. Now, internal is something that we can have. These are the conversations I have with women many times. And there was a very famous experiment that was done with dogs, which is very simple. And I'll make it really simple. These dogs are subject to shock treatments, to electric shocks, every time they cross a line. And after multiple of these shock treatments, the line itself is energized. That's why when the dogs try to cross over this line, they get this electric shocks and they are supposed to retreat. Yeah. Now, after a while, the electricity from this wire is removed. So if the dogs would cross, nothing would actually happen. But the dogs don't even attempt to cross. That's what I call a social conditioning. So as women, I think historically, and again, the whole societal conditioning, we don't even try what I call a self-rejection. So I would always ask women with whom I have conversations, when you look at a job description, how many times have you actually told yourself, listen, I'm not going to self-reject. There's always someone else who will reject me. Why don't you just go and apply? We don't do that. We self-reject. And these are the conversations I have with women. We have enough external factors that would limit us. And hopefully, probably in another 20 years, we would be able to say that, no, we don't have external factors. It's truly an equal world. But we can't wait for that. So we can always start with us as individuals. Yeah. So why would you self-reject? So self-limiting beliefs, I think a direct consequence of that is a self-rejection. We always self-reject. If you have to apply for a job, if you have to go for an interview, if you get invitation for a podcast, what do you think? Oh, can I do it? I don't know what Simon is going to ask me. Should I say? And you reject. And I always say this, why don't you let Simon reject you? He will anyway do a check with you before. And if he doesn't like your storytelling or if your content doesn't gel in with his podcast, he would anyway reject you. Why do you want to reject yourself?
It's really interesting you were saying about the traditional corporate leadership assumption of being quite macho. So interested to pick up on that point. Do you think there are opportunities for companies to improve their leadership by bringing more women into the business? And is there a direct correlation between successful businesses and these topics in your mind?
Definitely. There are more learned people than I. There's a lot of research which actually shows diversity helps, gender diversity helps. This is also the reason, take UK as an example, now most of the boards, for instance, is asking for 33% women. Germany is another example, 40% women. So I think the whole quote unquote, the quota system comes in because there is definitely a proven business value. My view on this is something probably a little radically different. I think gender is, again, historically we have, as humans, evolved and, go back to the hunting days, right? As we evolved, men were supposed to be the breadwinners because physically men were stronger and women were supposed to be the housekeepers. And this is how the whole, despite the fact that we don't use any physical strength now in our jobs, it's just mental strength. By that, we have not changed role definition. So this is why you don't see so many women, right? So this is a good thing, bringing quota, having that awareness. And why I said my thinking is radically different is, I think it's beyond the gender. I think it's more about the masculine traits and the feminine traits. Okay. So if I think about the masculine traits, as I said, the macho leadership is more the masculine. I know it all. I'm strong. I won't cry. I'm not vulnerable. The whole definition and image of a leader is I have to lead. And for that, I need to be strong and I need to exhibit my strength. And again, this probably goes to the hunting days when, the leader of the hunting pack had to be strong, physically strong. You had to exhibit physical strength. Now, mental strength has got nothing to do with that. Mental strength is about resilience, all the softer part, resilience, empathy, humility. All of this is what constitutes to a mental strength. So think about the times we are living in, uncertain times. Who knew about COVID until it hit all of us, took the world by storm? Who would have thought about Ukraine war? Who would have thought about now the tensions between China and Taiwan? You can't plan for this. So when you're living in a completely VUCA world, the whole macho leadership of I know it all and I know how to take it to the end doesn't work anymore. It's all the softer aspects, which is typically associated with women. So this is why these are feminine traits. It's not necessary that men cannot exhibit that. It's typically looked at as feminine traits. Humility. So I don't know, I will learn. That's very humble. Resilience. I have failed today, I will get up tomorrow. This is resilience. Very much, again, feminine trait. Empathy comes with compassion, caring, very much feminine traits. It's more a radical thinking, not necessarily associated only with gender. Independent of the gender, the feminine traits, the feminine qualities are what can actually help lead companies in these uncertain times.
Yeah, I'm thinking people listening to this podcast, coming back to the ideas of imposter syndrome, self-limiting beliefs, if people feel themselves as having those negative thoughts, do you have any kind of tips or directions of things you would advise people to do to get past that, to get through that, or to live with that, as I think you said earlier?
I don't think we are ever going to get over the self-limiting belief. Our mental models are built up based on our experiences. The more exposure you get, the more you see certain things in a very different way than you have seen so far, your mental models get adjusted. So if you have a self-limiting belief, go back to your childhood, you will see why you have the self-limiting belief. Now, you can't go back and change the entire scenario of your childhood. You can't change your growing up years. What you can actually do is identify that. Tell yourself, listen, I am not applying to a job because I'm scared of rejection. Or I feel hurt if somebody would reject me because I've applied to a job and I would get rejected. I would actually feel hurt. And hurt is the feeling. Address the hurt as a feeling. And then when you apply, you know that you can already be prepared for that hurt. You can already tell yourself, listen, I know I'll be rejected. I know I'll be hurt. And how do I cope with that hurt? The more you understand the underlying emotion, underlying feeling behind your self-limiting belief, the more you can address. Because hurt, and I can tell you, I don't like getting rejected either. If I would focus on that and say, I'm hurt and I'm not going to do it next time. You've self-rejected. You have succumbed to your self-limiting. Or if you say that I can't do it because of this, I can't do it because I think I'm not good enough. So let's take running as an example. This is my self-limiting belief. I think I can never do a marathon. My self-limiting belief. But what happens if I go and try? So now I can do 5K. I can't do more, but I can do 5K. I would have never thought I could do 5K 3 years back. That's a self-limiting belief. So I don't think you get over a self-limiting belief by just changing something in your head. I think it's more understanding that it is only a self-limiting belief. So that's one, the self-awareness, that's completely intrinsic. I would say the second is look for inspirations. So role modeling helps. If you actually, and for me, this has really helped. Again, I grew up in India. There are not, first of all, there are not so many women you can look up to. Second, you don't have so many women who are like you, who have had a background like you to look up to. But I take now the CEO of Chanel, Lina Nair. She comes from a very similar background. Indra Nooyi, who was a former CEO of PepsiCo. So you look at those people and you say, listen, they've had similar journeys, but they could get over journey roadblocks that I have also faced, and they've reached where they have reached. So it is possible. So look for role models and inspirations outside so that you know that there is someone else who has done it and you're not the only one.
Reshma, that seems like a fantastic place to draw the conversation to a conclusion. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your thoughts with us today. It's really appreciated. And hopefully people listening to this has been helpful and inspiring to them. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Simon. It was fascinating.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please click the follow button on your chosen podcast platform. We'd also absolutely love to hear your views. So please do leave us a review on those platforms, or indeed send me a message on LinkedIn. And we'll be back soon for another discussion with senior industry figures.